I would sooner send a friend, a family member, a patient to you, Dr. Kevin, for health information than any cardiologist I've ever worked with. And I've worked with brilliant cardiologists, and they just don't get the training in health. They get the training in sickness.
Welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast, where we provide education and inspiration to help guide you on your journey to look better, feel better, and most importantly, heal better. I end every podcast by reminding my listeners to lead by example, because leadership is about influence, and few people have influenced the world of cardiology quite like Dr. Jack Wolfson. He is a traditionally trained cardiologist with a decade of experience in Arizona's largest heart group. He had every accolade the medical system could offer. He performed procedures, he prescribed medications, he followed the rules. But real leadership requires the courage to ask better questions. When Dr. Jack met Dr. Heather, a chiropractor who would soon become his wife, his world got flipped upside down. She challenged him to look beyond symptoms, beyond surface level solutions, and actually into the root cause of disease. In 2012, Dr. Wolfson stepped out in faith and founded Natural Heart Doctor, a practice committed to uncovering the truth behind heart disease and offering natural, holistic solutions to patients across the globe. Since then, he's become a best-selling author, an international speaker, a respected voice featured on CNN, NBC, Fox News, the New York Times, USA Today, and more. He's earned accolades like Phoenix Top Doc, Top Holistic MD, not once, but 5 times. Dr. Jack himself, though, will tell you that his greatest legacy is not measured in awards. It's seen in the lives he's transformed and the message he carries, which fits so perfectly with our message at Foundational Health. His message: you can take control of your health naturally. You can live free from unnecessary drugs and procedures. You can lead your family to better health by example. Dr. Jack Wolfson is absolutely changing cardiology, and he's doing it by leading by example through leadership and love. And now for my discussion with Dr. Jack Wolfson. Dr. Wolfson, welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast.
Dr. Kevin, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be on, share some heart health truth with anyone who wants to learn about healthy hearts.
Awesome. And I think that's every single one of our listeners. So to start, I had the pleasure of hearing you speak in person. I don't know, it's probably like 7-8 years ago now in Las Vegas, which was so awesome, by the way. It was just a game changer for me and my brother, who's also a chiropractor. And one of the things that really stood out to both of us was just hearing the story of, how you were a traditional cardiologist and then met your wife, Heather, and she just flipped your world upside down. Could you walk us through that story?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. God does incredible things and works in such an incredible way in my life. And that's the only way that I could explain it, and is how it all kind of happened, because I was born into a cardiology family. My father was a cardiologist, so I was listening to cardiology stories in my mother's womb. And then as a young child, hearing stories, and my entire life I wanted to be a cardiologist. And that's exactly what I would do. I would do 4 years of osteopathic medical school, 3 years of internal medicine, 3 years of cardiology. And I would move out to Arizona from Chicago after my training. And I joined the biggest group in the state of Arizona. So as my career was taking off, unfortunately, my father was becoming ill. And he would eventually be diagnosed with something called progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. It's a Parkinson's-like disease. And the Mayo Clinic tells us they have no idea why my father's sick and dying, and they've got no treatment for my father, and he'll be dead in 3 years. And simultaneously, serendipitously, again, God intervened, and God introduced me to this young woman who was a doctor of chiropractic, and she told me all the reasons why my father was sick and dying. So now you have, again, Mayo Clinic has no reasons, and now the doctor of chiropractic has all the reasons, and all those things about how we eat, live, and think is what leads to disease. And sadly, as cardiologists and medical doctors, we're not taught that. We're not taught about real health and wellness. We're taught about pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs. We're taught about surgeries. So, it was really this epiphany moment, for me, and I was just, blown away. And this young 29-year-old chiropractor would become my wife, the mother of our 4 children. And I would leave that big cardiology group that I was with in 2012, start Natural Heart Doctor, the worldwide leader in cardiovascular health.
It's just so awesome. And no matter how many times I've heard that story, which again, I heard it in person, I've listened to the Paleo Cardiologist, your incredible book, countless times. And I know you say in there, and I heard you say this in person as well, that heart attacks are not caused by a drug deficiency, which I think, on the surface level is obvious. But what's also obvious is that the primary treatment for the prevention of heart attacks in the traditional medical model is drugs. So what are heart attacks actually caused by?
Yeah, well, heart attacks are caused by the same things that causes everything else. Too much bad stuff and not enough good stuff. So whoever's listening, that's your problem. Too much bad, not enough good. So you got to get more good and get less bad. But, again, I'm just such a big fan of chiropractic. And my eyes being open to that. And I love to say the chiropractic adjustment is incredible, but it's also what I would perceive as the chiropractic lifestyle. And back to your point about Las Vegas, there's nothing that really epitomizes to me what the model chiropractor is like than the group was together, in Las Vegas and all of your training, Kevin. And, when people talk the talk, but they also walk the walk. And I think that that's something is certainly missing in the mainstream medical world, but it's just we are not taught the fundamental language of health. So when you say what causes a heart attack and what causes a stroke and what causes atrial fibrillation and heart failure, these are some of the most common causes of morbidity and mortality, sickness and death in the world. And all mainstream has is, for prevention, take a statin drug or take one of these injectable drugs, and now they've got a new oral drug that is similar to the injectables. Like, their only strategy in the game here is to reduce your total cholesterol and LDL down as low as possible. And how sad for all the people, the doctors at the Mayo Clinic, when all they have in their toolbox is a bunch of different pharmaceuticals. And I like to say, hey, if you want the lowest cholesterol possible, just let's remove your liver. Your cholesterol will go down to 0 and you'll be dead. And in some ways, I think that that's what these people are heading towards. But ultimately, what I like to say is that there's a root cause to heart disease, like there is all disease, and you got to work on the root. And that's going to be the only survival strategy that's going to work. It's not about how does a statin drug lower your heart attack risk from 2% to 1.8% annually, which is the data. It's actually 1.84%. Annually for primary prevention. It's about how do we reduce our heart attack risk to 0, but also how do we reduce the risk of Parkinson's and PSP and cancer and everything else, down to 0. That's the strategy.
Which is, one of the things that's so cool. Well, one of the things I love and respect about you is you do walk the walk and you talk the talk, probably more than anybody that I see in the natural health world. And it really is as simple as less of the bad stuff, more of the good stuff. And the cool thing from there is that doesn't just apply to heart health. Like you said, it applies to your brain. It applies to your gut. It applies to every area of the body. If you're healing your heart, you're healing every area of the body, as opposed to when you're treating your heart with prescription drugs, you're harming every area of the body. So when it comes to prescription medications and being just, so overused, could you talk about what that does? Like if that's their goal, they're going to treat heart problems with medications. What does that do for them long-term and their long-term health?
Well, certainly statin drugs, for example, are the poster child of pharmaceuticals in the heart world. And statin drugs undoubtedly lower your numbers. They lower total cholesterol. They turn off the production of cholesterol. That's without debate. But they don't meaningfully lower the risk of heart attack, stroke, and dying. They do have significant side effects. They do lead to a false sense of security, like, hey, eat this, eat whatever you want, and just take this drug. And then, of course, they keep you plugged into the system. They keep you plugged into the mainstream system of the medical office, the pharmacy, the hospitals, and you're kind of in this particular circuit, round and round and round. And because of that, because you're plugged into that, you never really hear the message of health and wellness, which again, it's really about the chiropractic adjustment. It's the chiropractic lifestyle, why everybody in my practice has to be under chiropractic care. And I think really that is the longevity strategy. The life expectancy of an American male is 76 years of age. And all those people are on statin drugs. So if you want that, if that's the life expectancy you're looking for, with the last 10 to 15 years of that life being in and out of the hospital, in and out of the pharmacy, getting your medications, in a wheelchair, using a walker, that's what you're going to get in mainstream. But that's not the goal. What we call ourselves a natural heart doctor is the home of the 100-year heart, in the sense that we want to live our longest, best life until the day we die. As they say, kind of like die, die young, when you're old. And that's really what our strategy is.
Which is awesome. And speaking of living the best life, if anybody can hear a little background noise from Dr. Wolfson right now, that is the wonderful green noise, real green noise from the jungle of Costa Rica. And to me, like when I think about, my wife and I talk about this all the time, not just, the 100-year heart, but the 100-year lifestyle. And that is our dream, is to be walking on the beaches of Costa Rica in great health when we're 100 years old. And I know without a doubt that that's doable. Now,
well, I mean, let's say this, again, I said this when I spoke of the truth about cancer in 2016. I said, you cannot get healthy in the same environment where you got sick. So if you're sick in Minneapolis, if you're sick in Milwaukee, if you're sick in my hometown of Chicago, and I'm not bagging on those cities, they're just not healthy places to live. So if you're sick there, you can't heal in the same environment where you got sick. So what does that mean? Well, you can change up your food environment, the way that you eat, your sleep environment, the way you sleep, and your outdoor environment, your movement environment, and your mindset environment. You can change up all those things, spinal hygiene, the adjustment. You can change up all those things. And the more you change them, the better, because you cannot get healthy in the same environment where you got sick. So yes, we moved to Costa Rica because I don't want to die. I don't want to die like my father did at 63. So my father was a Chicago-based cardiologist. When I met my wife, I was the exact same path as my father. The only difference was, because, we ate the same way, same profession, same sleep, same work, same, I guess, I was probably a little bit more physically active than he was by the time he was, in his mid-50s. But the only difference, and we drank way too much alcohol. And I say there's no sob story to my father's alcohol use except for the fact he's dead. That's the sob story. He was the life of the party, the joke teller, the storyteller. But the sad part is he died. The difference between him and I is he was on Lipitor. He was on a statin drug, and I never did. I'm so fortunate to be here. And this is the way that, because I've got some people on my side, and they're like, Jack, you got to look professional. When people hear the advice of a cardiologist, they want to see the guy with a stethoscope, the shirt, the tie. I'm like, I did that. That's not me anymore. I've been there, done that for many years with the dry clean clothes, inside of the building, artificial lights. And I'm not doing that anymore. So as much as I can do podcasts and interviews and educate outside, like this is where I want to be, in the natural light. And if I can inspire people to do the same and say, hey, you may, listen, you may love, northern Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, great place to be in the summer. You got your friends, your family, your work. I get it. But on average, you're going to suffer the consequences.
Yeah, it's so true, which is why it's our dream to get out of here someday, at least for the winter months. And so for people like your father who, was on Lipitor, and that obviously there's a massive amount of people that are on blood pressure medications and cholesterol lowering medications, what would you say is the most important thing that they should understand about their blood pressure, about their cholesterol, and how, and because I think now, as you know, with the Maha movement, like the time has never been better for people to be waking up and realizing like, holy cow, maybe this is not the path that I want to go on, but they're still stuck. They still don't know like, okay, well, what do I do differently? So help them understand their condition a little bit better and then what they can do about it.
Okay, that's a great question, Doc. Ultimately what we're trying to do is that we're telling people that when you measure your blood pressure, when you check your cholesterol, those are measurements. You measure your blood pressure, you measure your cholesterol. And these are the metrics that we use of health. But they're not root cause of the problem. Like the problem is not high blood pressure. The problem is what causes the high blood pressure. The problem is not cholesterol. It's what's causing abnormal cholesterol levels, damaged or oxidized LDL particles, and so many other things in that area. So these are all measurements. It's kind of like when you get into the car and you look at, your gas tank, and your level on the dial about how much gas is your measurement or your metric on how much gas you have in the tank. Check oil. Maybe it's you look at your bank account every morning. Well, that's a measure of your financial status. Or if you're in business, you look at things like balance sheets or profit and loss statements. Again, the world is full of different metrics that people use to determine whatever they're trying to measure. So if we're looking at cholesterol and LDL and blood pressure and thousands of other markers of heart health, well, the more things that are on the good side, the less risk we have of having a heart attack, stroke, dying, cancer, brain disease, etc. And the more bad stuff that we measure, the higher the risk. But the answer is not going to be to medicate that, because that, of course, is not, that's as chiropractors, would say, that's like putting a sticker over the check engine light and now the problem is gone. That's what the blood pressure drug does. That's what a cholesterol drug does. And it hides away the problem. It tucks it away, but it doesn't address the root cause, which is why heart disease is still number one killer and why blood pressure drugs do not work to lower the risk of heart attack, stroke, and dying. So ultimately, those measurements are all part of it. And there are so many different things that we can check that tell us your status. We'll check you at time 0, make some changes, check you down the road. If numbers look better, you're at lower risk.
Part of our mission at Foundational Health is researching and partnering with wellness products that we trust. Our one-stop health shop is loaded with brands that we not only have extensively researched, but also trust and use ourselves. You can find everything from low EMF, red light therapy devices, grounding mats and sheets, non-toxic mattresses, saunas that help you detox faster without toxifying you, the best water and air filtration systems on the market, high-quality supplements and foods, exercise and fitness products, our favorite books, and so much more. Go to foundationalhealth365.com, click on Health Shop, and you'll find the links to countless products that you can not only trust, but also many that we have discounts set up just for you. Now let's get back to the podcast. So speaking of those numbers, and I don't even know if this is an answerable question because I know there's lots of variance and you look really deep when you're looking into, if somebody comes into your clinic. But is there, everybody's so caught up on, blood pressure numbers. In fact, I was talking to a woman yesterday that said, her blood pressure when she went into the office and the doctor checked it, it was 120 over 88. And the doctor said, oh my gosh, you need to get on a second blood pressure medication. So is there a number somebody should look at when it comes to blood pressure to start with?
Listen, the higher the number, the higher the risk. But, emergency levels, 200 over 120, something like in those ranges. But what you're telling me, I think that is egregious. I think it's malpractice. Again, everybody, all these cardiologists do it on a daily basis. So yeah. I'm not saying, you got grounds for a lawsuit or something like that because you don't, because everybody does it. It's standard of care. And all of it's controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. So ultimately, when I see things like that, it's just a sign of something is wrong. You're getting too much bad stuff and not enough good stuff. And that's the conversation I have with people. Doc, one thing I think is, really important for us is that us holistic practitioners, that we have the opportunity to state our case. So someone can go to the general practitioner down the road for primary care, or someone can go to Dr. Kevin for primary care. And then they'll make a choice. So Dr. Kevin states his case, or Dr. Jack states his case, right? And then the medical community, so we're basically like attorneys. So we're the attorney for health and wellness. They're the attorney for sickness and pharmaceuticals. Let's present to the patient, and then let's let them decide. Let's make this a totally free, freedom, of choice, and then let the person decide. And that's all what I'm fundamentally about, is giving people a lot of information. But there's an interesting equalizer in this whole thing, which obviously used to be the internet, right? And it is the internet, where people can go to the internet and and research this stuff. And then people accuse them. They'll use pejoratives like, "Oh, are you Dr. Google?" Yeah, I'm Dr. Google, or I'm a mommy blogger. And guess what? I'm a mommy blogger, and I went to PubMed.gov and I looked up all the original literature that you don't even know, that you're not telling me. And that's how I came up with these opinions. But now we even go beyond that. Now we go on to Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude. We're sitting there in the doctor's office, and the doctor is recommending chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery for stage 3 colon cancer. And then you get on to, your phone, and you're like, "I'm so-and-so with such and such. What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the alternatives?" I encourage people to do this in real time, right in front of the doctor. Because don't tell me take statins or I'm going to die. Don't tell me to take blood pressure drugs or I'm going to have a stroke. I want data. I want real numbers, and then I'll make a choice. Because when I tell people that cholesterol drugs lower their risk of having a heart attack by 0.14%, according to JAMA Internal Medicine 2022 meta-analysis, and they're like, "Wait a second, statin drugs lower my risk of a heart attack by 0.14%? Who would ever go for that, knowing all the side effects?" But the real egregious thing, Kevin, is that we're still leaving all those people at risk because they never heard the message of health and wellness. They just got the pill model. Let me say one more thing, too. I would sooner send a friend, a family member, a patient to you, Dr. Kevin, for health information than any cardiologist I've ever worked with. Now, what does that say? It says something obviously very good about you, but it's really kind of damning on the medical profession. And I've worked with brilliant cardiologists, and they just don't get the training in health. They get the training in sickness.
Yeah, I think it comes back to one of my favorite documentary quotes, and I don't remember who said it for sure, but an expert is somebody who knows more and more about less and less. And that is, as you know, from going through traditional cardiology training, that's the case there. You become an expert on what can pharmaceuticals do. Here's your symptom, here's your drug, but that's it. There's no training above and beyond that.
Well, and the community just, they don't really get that, though, because the doctors come across as all things knowing about health.
Yeah.
And that's really where the error, occurs, because they obviously, they don't.
So if we talk about cholesterol numbers here a little bit, and I know you take a very deep dive on this, so I don't expect to go into like all of the, particle sizes and everything, because you could go on forever about it. But if I look at me personally, I get some pretty extensive blood work every 6 months. And I have not done this, but I know that if I did take my cholesterol and heart numbers to a medical doctor, they would tell me that, yeah, get on a cholesterol lowering medication or you're going to die, because my LDL is much higher than what they recommend. My total cholesterol is much higher than what they recommend. But what I also know is I have no high inflammatory numbers. My triglycerides are at 40. My omega-3 ratios are perfect. And so is there more than that? Like, should I be looking for myself personally or somebody else that's in that same boat where, because I hear this all the time, like people are saying like, oh, my LDL is so high, I just can't get it down. But is there any research saying we should get it down?
Well, we are just so programmed because of the pharmaceutical industry with this whole villain of the story is cholesterol and LDL, this whole concept of the bad cholesterol. If LDL is so bad, why does every animal species on Earth make it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything, to your world, everything with a spine manufactures LDL, and it has a purpose, obviously. And the purpose is that it transports fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K around the body, CoQ10 around the body, triglycerides, as you mentioned, for mitochondrial fuel, energy around the body. It is part of our immune system, antioxidant system. It's an incredible, incredible molecule that should be celebrated, not vilified. To your point, there are high levels of total cholesterol, and there are high levels of total LDL, and the LDL particles you mentioned, and small, dense, oxidized LDL particles. There's value in these measurements. But of course, the answer would never be pharmaceuticals. It's always going to be, if I have abnormal particle numbers, we need to figure out why. We have to figure out the why. But the other flip of that, too, is that I don't know what the perfect level of LDL is for Dr. Kevin Schultz. I don't know it for myself necessarily. I mean, that's not something that we know, like what's perfect for us. So all we can do are all the things of the eat well, the live well, and the think well, and try and find a perfect number for us. But like you mentioned, having triglycerides at 40, having controlled markers of inflammation, having a good, high level of omega-3s and the quality omega-3 index. Those are evidence-based metrics that tell us that your risk of heart attack, stroke, and dying is lower than someone without those, totally independent of cholesterol and LDL.
And I know you often, speaking of all those tests, you say, test, don't guess, which is also something that I talk about here on the podcast. So what tests actually do matter for predicting heart attacks? And then what are the most common ones that you use on a regular basis?
Well, maybe we can circle back on this, but let me start off with two tests that I never run.
Okay.
Now I'll throw three tests. Number one, coronary artery calcium scans or CT angiograms for early detection. I'm not talking about if you're in a car wreck and you're in the emergency room and someone wants to make sure you're not having a subdural hematoma. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about for the early diagnosis of coronary artery disease. So I never order that. I never order, you've seen all these different scans that are total body MRI. Obviously, I never order those. And I never order nuclear stress tests. So running on the treadmill, we inject you with a nuclear tracer, thallium technetium, light up your body where we inject you with a radioactive material. The fact that we do that has to be seen at some point in the future is totally barbaric that we did this. And I did it on thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Why? Because it's very lucrative. So those are three tests, and we can unpack those, more, especially coronary CT in a second. But the tests that I think are the most important, if you could pick one marker, it would be a measurement of oxidative stress. It would be things like oxidized LDL. It would be things like myeloperoxidase, or we run this test that comes from Genova Diagnostics, which is what we call the heart attack risk test. And it's a urine lipid peroxides. So that's one way to tell us if we have oxidative stress. What does oxidative stress mean? It means that you have a lot more oxidation forces that are happening, which are totally normal, but you don't have the antioxidants to balance it. So number one, you are getting too much oxidation type products because of all those things we talked about, too much bad stuff, not enough good stuff. And then, you're not getting enough good stuff, so you don't have enough antioxidant supports. That leads to a condition called oxidative stress. If you have elevated oxidative stress, massive risk factor. HSCRP is an inflammatory marker. Major problem, get that checked. Homocysteine, big problem, get it checked. The omega-3 index you mentioned, tremendous test that tells us about the fatty acids and the quality thereof and the quantity thereof in our cell membranes. Very important. Lots of data with all these different things. So another marker that I would check is called Lp(a). It is a cholesterol type particle, and it's linked to a much higher risk of a heart attack and stroke and atrial fibrillation, actually. And it is something that is genetically linked, meaning you were born with it because one of your parents or both your parents potentially had it. I'm not a big believer that we've got genetic problems. I think we have family history problems because we eat, live, and think like our family members did. I think our genetics are perfect. We're built in the image of God, by God, and we're built perfectly. So when we apply too much bad stuff, not enough good stuff, that's where sickness ensues. But those are the top 5 markers that I would definitely have checked, on everyone.
And just to touch on that, the genetics aspect a little bit more, because I know I got this question a lot recently, and so many people are hung up on that. But when you say that you don't believe in the bad genetics, I mean, would you say that ultimately that means that yes, we may have that genetic marker, but it is our lifestyle that determines how those genes express themselves?
Exactly. That concept is called epigenetics. When I was in medical school in the 1990s, that's what we were looking at. What's called it was the Human Genome Project. We're looking at the genes of all of us, and there's of course thousands and thousands of genes that are there. And it turns out that it wasn't the genes; it was the epigenetics or above genetics, where the violations of eat well, live well, think well impact our genes to either produce proteins or not produce proteins. That's all our genes do. And when we feed it with bad information, we get bad results. So we feed it with good information, we get good results. It's just the way that it is. So, whether it's the biblical, faith-based model of it, or even in the evolutionary standpoint, we're built perfectly. We can run, jump, see, feel, make babies. We can do some pretty cool stuff. We're not genetically programmed to have heart attacks, strokes, and cancer for that matter. But the doctors love to blame genetics because then it implies there's nothing you could do about it. Well, you got a family history of heart attack, nothing you could do about it except for take this pill. And it allows them to be the perfect salespeople for the pharmaceutical companies to acquiesce to their profits.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to get your take on too, is that, I mean, like all of the new genetic testing that they're doing, and even the proposal to test every single baby for their genetics. I know that's coming down the pipeline, unfortunately. And it really just ties back to that's because they can keep them on in the pharmaceutical world for life, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think there's so many nefarious possibilities with that. But, one thing is that genes label people. So there's a lot of people running around right now, and the most famous gene that I know of that people test for, of course, is MTHFR, which is a enzyme, a gene that codes for an enzyme that is involved with the methylation process of essentially kind of oiling the circuitry of the body, making sure everything really is running at warp speed. Very important for detoxification, etc. So people get this genetic testing, and now they have a label, and they've done this to children, they've done it to adults, and people start to own their sickness as they would believe it. But MTHFR has 2 different variants or 2 different alleles, the C and the T. We'll leave it at that as far as what those are. But they each have a purpose. And what people would say is, I've got a methylation gene defect. Well, there's no defect to the gene. You just have one particular variant, and that has one particular function. And it may increase the risk in a modern society of various conditions, heart attack, stroke, autism, for example. Boys with the MTHFR 677 double T have triple the risk of autism, for example. But it is being triggered by environmental toxins, pollutants, chemicals, too much bad stuff, not enough good stuff. The TT gene actually would allow you to be more OCD, more anxious, which means you survive that way. If you're someone who is kind of walking through Paleolithic world and you're kind of smelling the flowers and life is grand, you get killed because some predator kills you. If you're the one who's always looking over your shoulder for the next person or thing, that's a survival gene. So again, I don't like these labels because then, and of course, even in the natural world, allegedly, now we start using different synthetic lab-made vitamins. And that's not what we do in our company. We use products like Kickstart My Heart, which is unvaccinated prairie grass-fed elk liver, heart, kidney, which has all of the methylated vitamins, in there that we don't need the synthetic stuff. So, anywho, that's kind of my take on genetics. But don't feel, again, family history is true. If your mother and father died at 60, you better figure out why, and you better avoid the same things. Well, everybody smoked, everybody ate ice cream, everybody lived in a cold climate and sat inside all day, and those are the problem behaviors. Don't blame it on the genes.
Yeah, and I think I already know the answer to this question, but obviously not a huge fan of getting those tests like the MTHFR, but then you are a huge fan of just saying like, hey, support your body for methylation regardless by taking the right supplements, by eating the right food, ultimately more of the good stuff, less of the bad stuff.
Yeah, one more, we talked about briefly about homocysteine as a marker of methylation success. And if your homocysteine is elevated, your risk is elevated. But how do we lower the homocysteine? And we do that, I think, through, like I said 20 times already, right? Get more good stuff, less bad stuff. But we have methyl B12 and methylfolate in our bodies. Some people more so than others. But you know what else has methylfolate and methyl B12? Animals and fish and eggs and raw dairy. It's all in there as well. So when you consume those things, that's how you optimize your methylation. And one marker of your success would be to drive down that homocysteine in that particular way.
Nutridyne is my number one choice for the vast majority of my family supplements. I'm a huge fan of nearly everyone taking what I call the foundational 4 supplements: a multivitamin, a spore-based probiotic, omega-3 fish oil, and vitamin D3 with K2. The large majority of people are deficient in many of these nutrients, and they are the building blocks to gut health, immune system strength, brain health, heart health, and every other aspect of your health. Don't fall into the trap of chasing symptoms with supplements, and instead start to rebuild your health with the foundational 4. We partnered with Nutridyne so that you can save 15% on every order, and not just with the foundational 4, but all of your other supplements as well. Go to foundationalhealth365.com. Click on Shop Brands and then Nutridyne, set up your account, and you're all set to automatically get 15% off all orders. Now let's get back to the Foundational Health Podcast. Quick question on supplements, and then I'm going to mention this because I want to circle back to why you don't recommend the calcium test, for example, because I know that's a really big one right now for so many people. But what are the top supplements that you use in your practice? I know they're fantastic. Like the level that you go to with the elk and just unvaccinated. I mean, nobody else is doing that. So they are the best of the best. But what are the ones that you are like your go-tos for supporting blood pressure, cholesterol, just overall vascular health?
Yeah, I think that the concept of food as medicine has been around for over 2,000 years. And what we've done is that we've taken this elk, New Zealand elk that we already mentioned, the liver, heart, kidney, put into a capsule. It is at therapeutic and medicinal doses. It's not homeopathic doses. It is a serving size of food. The other product that we like a lot is our wild salmon roe, which is the fish eggs from Lummi Island Seafood. We get that, and along with the placenta of the salmon is called the skein, and that goes that's very high in butyrate, butyric acids, very nourishing for the colon, for example. That all gets freeze-dried in the state of Wisconsin, and then it gets milled, encapsulated. The other product we like is called emu oil, Australian emu oil, very high in fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K. It's a great source of vitamin K2 as MK4, which keeps calcium in your bones and out of your arteries. I like a probiotic. I also like eating probiotic-rich foods, raw dairy, things like kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi. I also, from a supplement standpoint, specifically for cholesterol, like if we want to optimize not decreasing the production the same way statins do of cholesterol, but removing old cholesterol particles and LDLs from circulation, that's a product that we call OptiLipid. 7 different nutrients that are in that particular product, built by Biotics Research per my specs. One of the best supplement companies in the world, you know that as well. And then the other, for blood pressure, we kind of go after blood pressure in several ways to increase nitric oxide levels. So we've got an organic beetroot product, and then a product called Vessel Support, which is amino acids. The magnesium, the potassium kind of add-ons. That's how we would do those. I do use a lot of nattokinase inside of our product Flow. Good data on that for plaque reversal and as a natural blood thinner, if you will. Same thing with a product called Arterosil. So I'm kind of spitballing a lot of stuff. I'm a big fan of, we private label Biotics product, which is their Lyzyme, and we call that Cardiolith. And the idea that we are all deficient in lithium, and lithium is very calming on the nervous system, very good for parasympathetic tone and optimization. And ultimately, we're a little bit lithium deficient because no one's putting it in the soil, where animals are grazing and stuff like that. So those are just some of my strategies. I came out, in 2012 in my own practice with some of the synthetic lab-made stuff, and we've really moved away from it as much as possible, going food first.
Well, I think what you're doing is just phenomenal with the food first, and then for people that aren't getting enough in their food, which is the majority of people, of course, then having a supplement that so closely represents to that whole food, real food diet. So I think that's fantastic. Okay, so circling back to the calcium test, and this one I'm actually generally interested in myself. Like, why is that something you're not a fan of?
Well, this is because there's not many holistic cardiologists, and nobody is as extreme as I am, and you know that.
Yes.
As I tell people, I'm wearing organic cotton underwear in case you care, which you don't, and nobody does. But we take the lifestyle, and that's why I'm talking to you from Costa Rica, because again, I want to live. As it relates to the coronary calcium scan, which a lot of even quote unquote holistic practitioners recommend. Let's say, for example, you get the scan. I don't order the scan because of the radiation exposure. I don't like radiation exposure when it's unnecessary. The only time you get a test, of course, is it going to change your plan? A coronary artery calcium scan doesn't change my plan. Now you could say, well, if someone's score is elevated, statin drug, and if their score is a 0, no statin drug. And some people practice that way. I don't, because I never prescribe statin drugs, and I haven't done so in about 12 years. So that it doesn't apply to me. Now you could say, well, maybe it's more motivational. Maybe if someone has the abnormal calcium scan, they're more motivated to do better. Okay, if you are not motivated by the way you look, the way you feel, the fact that heart disease is the number one killer, the fact that people are dying at ages 76, that you're on all these different pharmaceuticals, like if that doesn't motivate you, is this final test going to motivate you to finally make differences?
So true.
And I think the other thing too, Dr. Kevin, is that it's the reason why insurance companies don't cover it is because they know it doesn't provide any value. It's a cheap test. They could easily cover it. But they know what happens is that it's a loss leader. So here's what happens. Someone pays out of pocket for a coronary artery calcium scan. It's elevated. They go to see their doctor in follow-up. They're told, you have coronary artery disease now. Now we've got a diagnosis for you. Let's get a stress test. So now you have a billable diagnosis. You get that stress test that insurance does pay for. And maybe that even leads to a coronary angiogram. Maybe that leads to stents and bypass surgery. And you know what we did for that person? Nothing. I hear from people all the time. The coronary calcium scan, I had it done, and ultimately I had an angiogram, and I had a 90% blockage, and they stented the blockage, and they saved my life. The problem is, that's not true. It's not true. All they did is open up an artery. Now, you would think it's true, and I would think it's true too if I didn't know better, but the reality is that stents and bypass are for people with symptoms. If you're having chest pain while you're shoveling snow, go get it checked out. Get an angiogram. If there's a blockage, fix it. I'm cool with that. But don't tell me that the coronary CT scan saved your life with a 90% blockage, because there's no evidence of that. And in fact, there's evidence that that's not true, which is why I say it. So the ischemia trial was a trial that was done in 2020. It showed that stenting people without symptoms does not save lives or prevent heart attacks. That is on the back of the Courage trial way back from 2007 that showed the same thing. Stenting or bypass surgery doesn't prevent heart attacks or save lives. So I understand, doctors, they've got this bravado to them. They've got the God complex. Hey, you know what, Dr. Kevin, you had 90% blockage. Good thing we tested for it. We found it. We stented it. Saved your life, man. And you're like, cool. Thanks for saving my life. Who wouldn't say that? The problem is it's a lie. It's a lie. Now, again, ultimately you could say, well, I found somebody with high levels of coronary calcium. I'm going to just blast them with every statin drug, every other pharmaceutical to lower their LDL down below 55 or whatever the current recommendations are for these people. And I'm going to save their life that way. Okay. If you want, again, this is what you and I do, Doc, right? We let the medical doctors, the cardiologists state their case over there, and we're going to state our case over here. And it's up to the person to decide. And hopefully, they realize that life expectancy of the American male is 76, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to choose something better.
Yeah, different path that leads to a much better outcome. And, again, thankfully, I think so many people are waking up to that and actually choosing that path. And so one of the things, if this is okay with you, one of the things that we try to do on our podcast is really involve our listeners and try to get the answers to their questions. And we've already, without a doubt, covered the majority of those questions. But I do have some, if you're okay with this, some quick fire,
yes,
best short answer questions.
You got it. I'm ready.
Okay. So Amanda wants to know, what are your best cooking oil recommendations, especially for someone who has heart disease in their family?
Okay, Amanda. So no matter what your health concerns are or your family concerns are, my favorite cooking fats are going to be bison or elk tallow or regeneratively raised beef tallow. It's going to be butter. It's going to be ghee. And olive oil would be my favorite plant-based cooking fat. And then also coconut oil. So use those.
Awesome. Thank you. Jamie wants to know the benefits of cardio versus resistance training for heart health.
Well, the good news is that resistance training includes cardio. So when you're doing push-ups, pull-ups, squats, lunges, or bands, or lifting weights, you're going to be huffing and puffing. You know it, I know it. So there is cardio there. The flip isn't true. While you're walking, you're not really building muscle mass or anything like that. I think really exercise is to be enjoyed and to be enjoyed outside. So the more push-ups, pull-ups, squats, lunges we can do outside, the better.
Love that answer. Rochelle wants to know, what can you tell her about improving AFib?
So AFib is a very common electrical heart rhythm problem. It is caused by the same things as everything else, too much bad stuff, not enough good stuff. If you have symptoms of AFib, it's something that we would need to work on. We can work on that naturally. Sometimes we need pharmaceuticals to slow down the heart rate. Sometimes people even need ablations. But if we're going to use pharmaceuticals, let's try everything beforehand. If we're going to use ablations, again, let's try and optimize the person so they have the most amount of success. But ultimately, there's a lot of root cause things for atrial fibrillation, and that's what we want to reverse. If someone has full-time AFib, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to reverse that naturally. If someone has what's called paroxysmal AFib, where they go in and out of AFib, that tends to be a lot easier.
Awesome. Chad says, how can someone not overweight, they exercise often, they eat healthy, they take a lot of good quality vitamins, still have high blood pressure? And then can that just be from stress and anxiety? And if they're living healthy, how high can blood pressure be until you got to really be concerned about it?
Yeah, we just keep peeling back the onion. My wife often refers to Dr. John D'Onofrio, who was a chiropractor who passed away several years ago, and he was always about one more step, and about how we always kind of keep going and going and going. So let's say you're eating right, per my definition, which is Paleolithic foods, hunter-gatherer foods. So you're eating right, and you're getting sleep, which is critical, and you're getting sunshine, and you have good circadian rhythms and balance, and you have good quality movement, and you have a good mental attitude. You're getting chiropractic care, which lowers blood pressure 17/10 in evidence-based literature, which is better than any pharmaceutical with only positive side effects, not negative. And then we get into the toxin category. And Doc, that's where we see a lot of problems really, is in the toxins. And if I had to put my finger on one particular problem for everyone, is living in a water-damaged home that is now compromised from mold and or bacteria. And that would be something. So whenever someone's like, oh, they were healthy and then they had a heart attack. Healthy people don't have heart attacks. Healthy people don't develop cancer, right? Only sick people do.
True. Okay, Amanda also says, is there research on the difference between men and women when it comes to the dietary recommendations that you make to people?
I'm not aware of research in this particular sense. I'm just going to go with a common sense approach of our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. At the time of Yeshua, when he was walking around Earth 2,000 years ago, the majority of people were hunter-gatherers living on Earth at that time. So they're eating free-range grass-fed meats. They're eating wild seafood. They're eating raw dairy. They are eating eggs and avocados and coconuts and fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds. Now they were eating stone ground, heirloom wheat, and of course everything was organic. So when you do that, that is ubiquitous, male or female. That is absolutely ubiquitous, male or female. I don't know why. It's interesting. My wife sells, some products from her company, Wild Mamas, and she's got a product, Man, that has a little bit of bison testicle in there, and she has a product called Woman, which has a little bit of ovary in there from the bison. So maybe that'd be one hair of a difference, where it's like, okay, let's give the men the testicle product and let's give the women the ovary product. Otherwise, I think we're pretty equal.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Okay, this one actually is from my mom. Do you, and I know you already covered this a little bit, but she's wondering if you have recommendations for a natural blood pressure remedy instead of blood pressure medications, of course, for someone that just cannot get blood pressure to come down despite countless efforts.
Okay, well, kudos to your mom for two sons that are chiropractors. What a blessing that is, really, really, on so many different levels. So when it comes to blood pressure, again, it's we eat well, live well, think well, test, don't guess. Evidence-based supplements supplement the health strategy. As it relates to blood pressure, yes, I sell product. We start with the foundational things we talked about: Kickstart My Heart, Wild Salmon Roe, Emu oil, good healthy gut microbiome. All health starts in the gut. I learned that from my wife as well. And again, make sure, you're under chiropractic care, reduces blood pressure 17/10 in the hypertensive. After that, again, there is nitric oxide boosters to help open up blood vessels. That's our organic heartbeat powder, manufactured by Biotics Research. L-arginine, citrulline, taurine, those are amino acids that are in our product vessel support. So there's a lot of ways to kind of go about it naturally, and I would just try everything natural. Not before I wouldn't take pharma. If you are on high blood pressure drugs, you must be on a plan to get off of them as soon as possible.
Love that. Okay, two more. Dana says, do you have lifestyle nutrition recommendations for spontaneous coronary artery dissection heart attack survivors? And her follow-up to that, then, is that related to menopausal women in particular?
So Spontaneous coronary artery dissection is one of the most common causes of myocardial infarction in women under the age of 50. It can be stress-induced. It can be pregnancy-induced. Obviously, too much bad stuff, not enough good stuff leads women to get SCAD. Maybe there is some genetic, predisposition in those people, but also, again, something has to trigger the gene. As far as the recovery is concerned, same thing. Eat well, live well, think well, test, don't guess, evidence-based supplements, biohacking strategies. That could be sauna, red light therapy. It could be tissue plasma exchange, could be ozone. I mean, a lot of different things that could be done there. But I have seen more than my handful and share of SCAD people that we treat naturally. One of my favorite people is a woman by the name of Danielle Denline. She's been on Dr. Oz regarding SCAD. So there's definitely ways to help. And SCAD survivors, it's scary. And you want to know how to survive and how not to have another event, because the biggest risk factor for SCAD is a previous SCAD event.
And so speaking of biohacking, I mean, I do all things natural, and I'm a big fan of sunlight and fresh air and all the other things that you can get naturally. But I also am a biohacker here, especially during the winter months in Wisconsin. If you had like one or two top biohacking tools when it comes to heart health, what are your favorites?
Well, sauna has the most definitive data. That's for sure. As far as sauna users living longer, that's quite clear. I am a fan of ozone. So we sell ozone suppositories on our website. I am a fan of that. I am a fan of, if you live in some of these climates where you're like, okay, would red light be beneficial to me at climate? Would a vitamin D lamp be beneficial when you live at latitude? The answer is yes. I think it's better than nothing. Really making sure your circadian rhythms are dialed in, and using incandescent bulbs, candlelight would be very beneficial, blue blocker glasses, and again, there's a lot of different strategies. Biohacking is meditation. A biohack is using brain tap and some of these other modalities to kind of hack the system. Peptides obviously get a lot of conversation as well. There's so many in that space, but I think that we need to really just be focused on the individual things. So for example, if we're talking about, well, how do I get my vitamin D when I live in Minneapolis? Well, that's where you eat a lot of seafood. You eat a lot of animal products. You eat a lot of eggs. You eat a lot of raw dairy, a lot of these extremely nutrient dense foods that should help you. And then of course that takes it to the flip of in the summertime, make sure you stack up that summer sun. You're getting that high quality vitamin D, high levels that hopefully would last you through the hibernation of a Minnesota, northern Wisconsin winter.
Okay, so last question is from John, and I think we've already answered quite a bit of this, but he kind of puts it all together. So I thought it was a good one to end with. For someone who's new to prioritizing heart health, doing everything at once can obviously feel pretty overwhelming. And for some people, when they're new to it, leads to burnout. Can you walk us through a phased approach to heart healthy living where someone can start small and then kind of build momentum from there?
The first thing I would mention would be to eat organic food. Just clean up just get the crap out of your diet. That would be, and you can have sugar when it's raw honey or maple syrup. You just can't have the processed stuff. You can't have the artificial stuff and things like that. So if you want to have, organic pancakes on the weekend with maple syrup, I don't think that's the biggest deal in the world for the majority of people, unless you're trying to cut weight, and this as well. Get outside for a walk after every meal. Pray before every meal. Go to sleep a little bit earlier. Spend a little bit more time outside. And the beautiful thing is, Doc, this is that it's free. Going to sleep earlier, that's free. More time outside, that's free. Prayer, gratitude, spirituality, those things are all free.
Yeah.
So
I think that's such a great takeaway too, because so many people not only get overwhelmed, but they also think oh my gosh, the cost of all of this. And there are countless free things that the large majority of people just aren't doing. And that is a great place to start. All right. So I end every podcast by encouraging my listeners our tagline here is make health your hobby. And I know that you're also a huge advocate of all of those things like we just talked about, all the free stuff, the fresh air and the sunlight and movement, doing push-ups outside. What are some ways that you could recommend for, above and beyond what you've already mentioned, maybe if there are any, for people to make those things a regular part of a daily routine?
Well, I think that the routine is really critical and setting up an online calendar, so you get a notification on your phone where it's like, again, to go outside, in the morning, or, make sure you're drinking organic coffee. Make sure, you set your alarm for when you're supposed to go to the chiropractor. And one simple thing too, I think is very important, again, is we kind of, touched on this water damage, mold and bacteria. Check your home for all the different toxins and poisons. Yes, you've got things like EMF. Yes, you've got other carpet and plastics and phthalates and, laundry detergent, fabric softeners, dryer sheets, all these other poisons. But mold in a home is biblical. It's mentioned in the book of Leviticus. Yeah. It may be the single biggest cause of all disease, morbidity, and mortality in the world. So don't tell me your house is new. Don't tell me your house doesn't have mold, because it does. That's just the sad reality, is that just about every home has some amount of water damage. Houses are built out of popsicle sticks. So when you build a house out of popsicle sticks in northern Wisconsin, I don't have to tell you, what's going to happen. It's just not good.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you have a favorite for mitigating that? I know that's kind of a loaded question. Well, but ozone, is that something that you recommend?
Yeah, there's as far as ozone could kill the mold, but sometimes I think a dead mold is even worse than a living mold.
Okay.
But you really got to get you got to hire a good inspector to find where the mold is coming from, and then if they can remediate that by replacing all the materials, and then you would retest and see if your environment's safe. That would be one strategy to do so. We sell a test on our website, which is called the Swiffer test, where you collect dust samples of your home and we test it for mold and bacteria. And then from there, at least now you know a root cause. It is difficult to deal with. It is difficult to deal with. Not impossible, but it can require significant drastic changes. But like I said, I want to present my case to you and say, this is what's causing your problem, and this is my solution. And then the other side does the same. And now you are the judge and the jury. You decide what's going to work for you. Because there are people who would say, I understand that my diet's terrible. I understand my house has mold and bacteria. I understand that I have lousy relationships and no community. And I understand that I don't get sunshine, whatever. So I'm not going to change those things. I'm going to take a Lipitor. So you're free to make that choice. The problem is, if you make that choice, you're going to die. You're not going to make it. So it's not either or. It's not like, well, I'll just take a drug and, I'll live happily ever after. It's just not the case. You're going to die. So if you want to live, these are the things you're going to do for you and your family, your family, everyone living in the home, pets too.
It's such a huge point to make too. Like parents, we always encourage them to see themselves for what they are, which is a leader. They are the leader for their families. They are the leader for their children and their grandchildren. And so really, really, really huge. So we're going to have tons of links for your website, your supplements, that mold test that you mentioned on our website. I actually know a great local guy who can test for mold. So we'll, for all the listeners, we'll have all of that on the show notes. But in closing, what is the best way that you recommend people follow you, people find you?
Yeah, so my website is naturalheartdoctor.com, and we're on Instagram and we're on Facebook at Natural Heart Doctor, as well. And, again, I appreciate it. I appreciate the ability to, share this with your audience. And I think, I just also want to touch on that point of when you change as a parent and as a grandparent, you are influencing generations that are here on earth now and generations in the future. You're breaking the link. You're breaking the chain of disease. So again, Dr. Kevin, I applaud you and really so many different chiropractors that are really just, you guys have been shouting this from the rooftops for years and years and years. And I'm just, I'm so fortunate to help be a spokesperson for health and wellness, alongside the great chiropractors. And again, I do appreciate your time.
Well, I greatly appreciate your time, and I just can't thank you enough for not only what you do, but more importantly, just who you are as a person. So much respect for everything that you do, Dr. Jack.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Foundational Health Podcast. As always, if you would like to learn more about making health your hobby, visit our website at foundationalhealth365.com and follow me on Facebook at Kevin Schultz DC Foundational Health.